Log on to kcbzradio.com and check the schedule for Situation and Circumstance Live, complete with music, live phone call access, and additional audio and programming. Anthony and TBT would love for you to be a part of the live broadcast and recording of Situation and Circumstance at kcbzradio.com.
Situation and circumstance. Fight for wisdom, not ignorance. Trying to avoid it is not a lonely dance. Can we see each other with only a glance? Situations and circumstances. Fight for wisdom, not ignorance. Trying to avoid it is not a lonely dance. Can we see each other with only a glance?
Cake mixing, race mixes, matrix, kill the witches, 3 digits, made of 6s, cake.
Oh yeah. Once again, welcome to Situation and Circumstance. Of course, we're here at kcbzradio.com, and I am your host, Anthony, Mr. Classiq, aka ACE Jackson, all of those names, and I'm here with the illustrious, phenomenally balanced TBT. Look, he's looking at me like he didn't have to. What's illustrious? When we become that? Say something to the people, Julius and Mariah.
Hi, how you doing?
What up? He's gonna say something about my what up.
Now I'm not gonna say something about your what up. So yeah, welcome to the show, everybody. I want to first give a shout out to everyone who called in, those individuals who were able to actually make it, whose calls were actually able to get through, as well as those who were just considerate enough. We saw a lot of calls just really hanging on and trying to get in, and I know we didn't have enough time for all of you. There's just quite a number of callers, but hey, speaking of that, you can reach us at 502-509-5229. That number again, 502-509-KCBZ. And that's where you can reach us at. And we'll be taking calls periodically throughout this extremely wonderful topic. This is part 3 of race obligations. And today, we have some very special guests in the house. We're going to meet them in a little while. And we're going to talk a little bit about white privilege. You see how I did the pause thing there first? We're going to talk a little bit about white privilege.
I got it.
Yeah,
we got it.
Yeah.
And so we're going to jump into that when we return. So please don't go nowhere. Oh, you know what?
What's up?
What was the name of that place we were eating at that we had that meeting?
Wow.
With that delicious, it had that delicious Nigerian food. And we are Situation and Circumstance. Go ahead, Eric. Let's go back into what are we going to listen to today? Joyner Lucas is one of my favorites there. Let's go into Joyner Lucas, and when we come back, we'll just jump right into it. Situation and Circumstance, kcbzradio.com.
Log on to kcbzradio.com and check the schedule for Situation and Circumstance Live, complete with music, live phone call access, and additional audio and programming. Anthony and TBT would love for you to be a part of the live broadcast and recording of Situation and Circumstance at kcbzradio.com.
Oh boy. So that was, once again, welcome to Situation and Circumstance here on kcbzradio.com. And that was Kamal Bell. And he was on the Stephen Colbert show. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Colbert. No rolling of the R. Colbert.
It's more of a in your throat thing, but it's okay.
It's okay. Colbert.
Yeah. Good,
okay.
Good
y'all
try.
Y'all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's right.
Good
That's
try.
all that matters. We try.
Exactly.
And so he was on that show, and of course being interviewed, and he was kind of getting right into what white privilege is. So one of the things that's very important for me, similarly to early on in part 1, when we talked about gentrification and some of these things, and sometimes people hear certain words, and then these words have gotten to where they're only valuable to those who know what it means. And then other people either don't, or they don't spend enough time trying to figure it out, or they just think they know. And so when I think of white privilege, I'm reminded of a time when one of my colleagues, they were going to go work at a particular area. And they got there, and she's a white woman, and she went in, and the majority of the people that she went to talk to were people of color. And when she got there, she was trying to explain why some things are happening the way they are, in the sense of that, well, some of that, is my white privilege that allows this to happen or that to happen. And when some of the people of color heard this, they were immediately offended, because they felt like when she was saying it was part of her white privilege, the feeling that they had was that she was saying like, hey, I have privilege, I'm better than you. And so it was really clear then, at least from my perspective of hearing my friend tell me this story, that there's just some people who hear the words and they don't really know what it means. They don't know what white privilege means. And so I'm going to go ahead and give you a really quick definition of it as given by the dictionary. Inherent advantages possessed by white people on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. So it's kind of like what Jonas Lucas said in that song that we just heard. He said, I wasn't enslaved, but I was still affected by its history. And so white privilege would be those who could say the same thing. They weren't maybe slave owners, but they've still certainly been affected oftentimes, and more times than not, in a positive way, in terms of finance and legacy and teachings in school and who our heroes are and all these different things. They've been affected in a way that allows them to have certain privileges that are, well, not privy to someone else that may not be able to fit that bill. And so I have a couple of guests on the show here today. The first of which I always get challenged by someone's name, one of the names or the other. And so really good friend of mine here today. His name is Paul, and then that last name,
Himmelstein.
Himmelstein.
Yeah.
Said it right? Himmelstein?
Himmelstein.
I like that. Okay. So Paul Himmelstein of the Himmelsteins?
Of family, including the Himmelsteins, yes.
Gotcha. And so welcome to the show. I could say so much about this individual. Not only is he someone who walks the walk and talks the talk in terms of exercising his amendment rights and using those rights to show other European Americans or white Americans what this whole white privilege thing is about, how it affects people. And so I want you guys to not only welcome into the show, but maybe you can tell us, before we get right in there, tell us a little bit about what you do and who is Paul Himmelstein?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on the show. I feel like it is it's a real honor to be invited on a public forum about this issue. And before I begin, I'd also just like to thank everyone in my life who, up until this moment, who has, served as a mentor, served as a support, as I've been going through my learning journey and my activist journey, and to the people who contribute so much of their time and energy, far more than I do, to being on the front lines and in the background of the struggle. In whatever form that may take. So I just want to really acknowledge that I am definitely not here alone, nor am I maybe even the best person to be here. So yeah, just a little bit about me.
Nice and humble. I love that.
Yeah, right.
They could, listeners can't see us. We're all in here smiling like, yeah, we're loving what you said. Go ahead, Paul. Talk to us.
Quick version is 30 seconds. I was, about 5 years ago, I was going to go to law school for environmental law up in Lewis and Clark. Before that, I had been a caseworker in a refugee clinic in southern Tel Aviv, working with Sudanese refugees. And then instead of going to law school, I didn't, 2 weeks before I was supposed to go, and worked for 3 years raising money on the streets for various international NGOs, most primarily Plan International, talking about gender inequity around the world to people, raising a bunch of money. After that, I hopped on the campaign trail, worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign, which is a whole other conversation that we can get into. There are problems, there are celebrations.
I like Bernie.
Yeah,
Bernie's great. I like Bernie.
It's a tricky situation right now. And after that, I worked in Oakland Unified School District for a year and a half, worked at East Oakland Elementary School, and now I work at Soul Shop, doing development, helping raise money for a empathy and emotional intelligence program for elementary school students.
Yeah.
Yay,
Shout
Soul
out.
Shop. Yeah, shout out,
Good
Soul
stuff.
Shop. Okay.
And I also volunteer a little bit with the Oakland chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice, which mobilizes white people in the anti-racist movement.
Wait, say that last part again. You work for where and they do that?
I do a bit of volunteering. I've taken a step back in the last 6 months for a few different reasons, but really beautiful organization, Showing Up for Racial Justice, Surge, which is a predominantly white volunteer organization that mobilizes white people in the anti-racist movement. And I do not speak right now as a representative of Surge, just that organization exists. And I'm involved with it sometimes. And yeah, that's what I do right now.
All right.
Whoa,
that's a lot.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Good stuff. One of the things that stands out is what you said, Wileen. You said a lot of wonderful things, and clearly you're active. You're not just out there, looking. You're active, and I wonder what made you. So you said Surge, and I get that you're saying you're not, necessarily a representative, but you're certainly a supporter. Surge, which is Showing Up for Racial Justice. I don't know if that's the first group that you were involved with, because it sounds like earlier you said gender and equity. So I don't know if that's the first organization that you worked with where you were learning and or supporting the education of white privilege. But if it is not, I'm wondering what led you to believe that as a, I don't want to presume, European American?
Yes.
Okay. So as a European American, other people are looking like, what else did you think? You see my skin? You see what I look? No, we try not to assume.
Yeah.
You never know.
He could be South American.
He could be South American, right? Yeah. He could be Australian, which would kind of be the same situation. Could be an Antarctican. So I wonder, what was it? Is there something particular that happened, or something specific that happened? My people want me to say Pacific, something Pacific that happened that caused you to, what makes a European American start wondering about something like white privilege? What's the draw there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think everyone who kind of comes into it has their own journey. If I was to pinpoint a specific time, I studied philosophy and politics in college, and just the combination of critical thinking, which, Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, really focuses as a way to lift people out of their circumstance and begin questioning what's around them. So learning critical thinking in my philosophy degree, and then learning like the political landscape, I really combined the two and had my first real awakening that took on that term of white man's burden, which is, whoa, given the set of circumstances involved, it is absurd that I am in this place of wealth and access when so many have not. Which sounds like it quickly gets into white saviordom, which it did for me. Mm-hmm. I had quite a few years of, oh my God, I have to self-sacrifice. I have to give away everything. I can't touch anything. I need to save everybody around me. I need to find this pure monk path, or what have you. And so I did a few years of really just soul searching, whether that was working at that refugee clinic or working on organic farms. I lived in Israel for a year. My last name's Jewish. I'm half Ashkenazi Jewish, and living in Israel really woke me up to a lot of the ways that institutional violence can play out on a micro scale. And I don't really want to get into Israeli politics right now, but it was a rude awakening for me to go from one end of the spectrum to be like, I'm really supporting this, to the other end, which is, oh wow, I feel like I've been misled, And so the journey continued. I really focused on environment, and then I focused on gender because they were very immediate to me as I met people and learned more. And I think the race piece really for me started with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I remember I was talking to my family over the holidays, and I said, yeah, Black Lives Matter. And my loving, intelligent family, all 7 of them turned on me and were like, well, what about Blue Lives Matter? Yada, 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 all lives matter. All these things. I'm like, whoa, if my family really feels this way, then there must be so much work to do. And then I learned one statistic from Yes Magazine, and it was When during emancipation, the black community in the United States in 1870 had 0.5% of GDP. And then
GDP being
gross domestic product, the way that the U.S. economy is measured. So only 0.5% of the U.S. economy, even though slave labor was 3/5 of Southern GDP, right?
Right.
And then only 100 years later, that had only grown to 1%. And then when overlaid with, and I'm a systems thinker, obviously, like immediate makes me feel, but that system makes me act. When that fact of GDP is overlaid with slavery, the lack of immediate reparations, the Jim Crow laws, redlining, and now leading up to the war on drugs and mass incarceration, just the continuous theft, it clicked for me, the numbers. I'm like, oh, duh. And then if that access to resources and theft is put on the black community and communities of color in general, but very specifically in the black community, then I'm a beneficiary of that. And not just, oh, hey, like my family got lucky, but like I am a direct beneficiary of that. And I can go into the definition of white privilege after this.
Yeah.
If you want, yeah.
No. Yeah.
Trigger warning.
No, I actually want to, I just want to remind our listeners that Paul, who you just heard speaking, is, once again, he is European American. He's white. And I believe, and I'll have to wait and see, but I believe our definition of cracker you wouldn't fall into that definition. Julius?
No, you wouldn't be a cracker.
Okay.
Not from my definition of stuff. Not from my definition.
Okay. So, and I didn't think so either, but I want to make sure we have listeners and they want to, to make sure everybody knows what we mean when we're saying different things so that they don't just lump it all into this one thing. Because when I'm hearing him say everything that Paul just said are things that I hear in our conversations when I'm talking to other people of color, specifically African Americans or Black people or Pan-African, etc. When I'm hearing people have these conversations, we're saying all this stuff, but I often feel like other African Americans don't hear white people having that conversation, or maybe don't believe it exists, or don't know. So I'm just wanting to remind people that everything you're hearing it's authentic. You don't have to pinch yourself. You're really hearing somebody, and then you heard him in the beginning. He was real humble in saying that he doesn't even know if he's the best one to speak on this. Already giving us an indication that he's not alone in these feelings. So I just want to make sure our listeners are clear on that.
Yeah, and I love that you were also super honest with saying that in the beginning you did have the white savior dumb. Mm-hmm. That's what you were leaning towards, and then you shifted out of that.
Yeah, or I continue to try to.
Right. Yeah, so just like your humble honesty and rawness in that too.
And really quickly, white saviordom. I just want to make sure listeners understand that you're going to hear a lot of terms, and I don't want part of the point of doing all this is so that we don't assume we know what these things mean, and or are using them incorrectly. And so, white saviordom. What's a quick definition of white saviordom?
If I was shooting from the hip, I would say that white saviordom is a way of acting in service to relieve personal guilt by helping those less fortunate, and by doing that continues the divide of inequality by saying like superiority, inferiority, gift, and through that gift continued ownership and continued debt from the people that are being helped in. Yeah.
Like, I just gave that black guy a job.
Yeah.
So, hey, I'm not part of the problem because I hire black people.
So most white liberals, would you say?
I think that it's pretty pernicious in a lot of white culture, and it's also hard. It's very hard not to be. And I think one of the deepest lessons that I've learned in my journey recently is the repeated maxim almost in some of these activist circles, which is like white people or people from privilege do not expect to be thanked. like go into it not expecting to be thanked and not waiting to be thanked and not being upset if we are not thanked. And from that, it really sort of purifies the action or the motivation for it from what I've felt. And it doesn't mean, I won't be thanked, but it doesn't mean that I'm not going in expecting to be thanked. And I feel like that is a good starting point.
Sound like something I heard in some religious books. Once again, you're here at kcbzradio.com here with Situation and Circumstance. We'll be right back with more from Paul Himmelstein. We'll also meet Jeremy Capdevielle. And, of course, TBT, the best team. Let's do it.
Log on to kcbzradio.com and check the schedule for Situation and Circumstance Live, complete with music, live phone call access, and additional audio and programming. Anthony and TBT would love for you to be a part of the live broadcast and recording of Situation and Circumstance at kcbzradio.com.
Oh, Charlemagne. That was Childish Gambino, a.k.a. Danny Glover, on The Breakfast Club, and specifically the majority of that conversation was coming from he and Charlemagne of the Breakfast Club. And so part of Charlemagne's point was like, when we say things like that, we're kind of perpetuating it, right? So if we say, if we're calling it like white privilege and we name it this thing, then it's all of a sudden, making other black people like believe it a certain different way. Like, it's really a fake thing that's not happening. But when we call it something, now it's a real thing, and so we're going to welcome Jeremy Capdevielle to the show. He's been here before, and one of the interesting things about why he was here before, he was here before because he is biracial. But like many people who are biracial or multiracial, sometimes if that makeup is of a certain amount of black blood, African American, etc., then you can kind of tell, and then that person is generally and usually treated like the side that like black, like they're black basically at that point. Whereas there's other cultures when that makeup is like that, no one is actually looking at them and saying, well, that's this makeup or a makeup or a derivative of these 2 or 3 different racial or ethnic backgrounds. This is, people will look at these people sometimes and say, well, you just are what I see. Like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we look at Jeremy and we just think, well, hey, here's a white guy, when he's actually, I believe, European and Spaniard?
Mexican American.
Mexican American who looks. This is why he's here, because someone say, well, if you're Mexican American, why are you here talking about white privilege? Maybe you can answer that for us. And then why are you here talking about white privilege if you're Mexican American?
I just want to say it cracks me up that you're like Spaniard, and like what I love partly what I love about this here is you're just you can't know everything. It's like you're here representing and inviting a lot of people, and then Mariah's here correcting you, and it's amazing modeling. And I'm like, here. Really, Spaniard?
and he's known you for a while, But that's Anthony. We're just human.
I know it's and we can laugh about it and love each other.
Mm-hmm.
So what was his question? Was Anthony left the room? It was why is talking about white privilege important to me? There's the layers to that.
And do you feel like you have that? Do you feel like anything about
privilege? Like, do you think you're white?
Benefit from it?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I grew up my whole life just like caring for people like hell, whether it's family, friends, really really diverse friend groups. And I think, in my own family experience, I've seen the ways I haven't recognized my dad's experience based on my own lens and my own privilege. And I think in, the things that Paul said earlier as he's talking about that, I'm like snapping 100% resonating, and it doesn't just infuriate me, the dynamics that play out because of white superiority, but it breaks my heart. And it's like sitting here talking about it and being in this room, it's like I have an emotional, springing up because I see the way that white superiority hurts so many people.
What you doing about it?
What am I doing about it? On the day-to-day, like multiple layers to that. On the day-to-day, I'm like, if I'm walking down the street, one is I'm like, I go through my different phases of just kind of like, I'm always watching, I'm like, wait, did I just reach for my wallet because I forgot my wallet isn't here, or did I reach for my wallet because of something else? And I'll look around, I'll kind of, so personally, I feel like I'm super vigilant. I'm dissecting my own responses and then the heart of my work is building understanding and more awareness through storytelling, and people just sharing stories with each other, getting to know each other better. And I think I work with corporate America now these days, and the a lot of people are trying to figure out, like, how do we be more inclusive and create an atmosphere of belonging, and it's like it gets so complicated. And I'm just like keep going back to it's like we just need to actually build relationship and build the relationships where we can care about each other, hear each other, and understand one another's realities from that place, rather than this kind of like top down, you need to know my reality so you can know how to orchestrate our response. So in my work, I'm really trying to build connections between people that are in the heart, so that people can be invested in each other in ways that open their eyes on the day-to-day. And it goes both ways in every relationship. Yeah.
And I want to respond to that before I do that. Thank you for listening to kcbzradio.com, kcbzglobal.com, chambersradio.com, KCBZ Destination Global. Music is life and life is love. So thank y'all for listening and tuning in. So you were saying, what I hear from you is saying, like, you want to see the human first. You want to learn about that person first, learn about them first, so that way you can understand them. Is that correct in what I'm hearing?
I'm always wanting to understand people more and like dig beneath the surface, and it's like check my lenses and my assumptions of people, whether they look white, they're black, like whatever my assumption is when I first meet someone. I feel like personally I'm always wanting to uncover more of how I see the world and how that's skewed from how the world really is.
I have a question. A friend of mine brought this to my attention, I think about a year ago, as I was like learning about all these terms of like white privilege and like having a term for it and using our voice and all of that. And I love how she put it, where it's like having white privilege, and then as a man, it's like you're at the top of that privilege. So in a setting, it's like it's your duty to say something. She's like, it's because you have the strongest voice in the room, right? So if there's a situation that arises where someone, let's say if it's about a colorism, then that white man has the duty to say something because their voice is going to be heard more. Do you feel like that is part of your duty, or is that not, or do you take that into account in certain situations?
I do, and it's multi-layered, because what always comes up with that is when I'm seeing something happening, I'm like, I don't want to speak for anyone else, and everyone has their own fucking voice, right. and like I don't feel like I need to be a person to speak for them, but so
not speak for them, but be like hand on the mic is what I'm saying. Be like, exactly. Yo, we need to listen to this. Sit down. You don't know what you're talking about. And I want to bring a situation. If there's racism happening in a company, old white man has something to say about it, always badgering people, but no one's speaking up because they're not white men. They're black women, black men. So no matter how many times they say something, they're not being heard. Now there's another white man that's in the room now and knows that that's racism happening, but doesn't say anything. Now that's, in my perspective, that person says, hey, sit down for a second. Let me pass this mic on over. You listen to them, because now that person that is racist sees this other white person as an equal in their eyes because they are racist and they have this privilege. So now that person passing over the mic and being like, no, this is a person that you need to listen to. They feel a certain way.
That actually resonates with me. But here's what we'll do. I want to give you a chance to answer that. But what we'll do is we're going to go into the song by Gregory Porter and Kim really quickly. We had a couple of more guests just join us. And so when we come back, we'll speak more with Jeremy Capdevielle and Paul Himmelstein, and we'll get to meet Jesse. I'm not sure about his last name or if he even wants to give it, but we'll talk to him a little bit coming up here real soon. You're here at kcbzradio.com. Situation and Circumstance 502.
Log on to kcbzradio.com and check the schedule for Situation and Circumstance Live, complete with music, live phone call access, and additional audio and programming. Anthony and TBT would love for you to be a part of the live broadcast and recording of Situation and Circumstance at kcbzradio.com.
Once again, that was, welcome back to Situation and Circumstances. And that was, once again, Kamal Bell on the Stephen Colbert show. Still probably said that name a little wrong. But that was him just giving us a little bit more dialogue and intro into this thing that we are talking about today, white privilege. This is the part 3 of our race obligations series. And I believe when we were last, Mariah, I think you had a question that Jeremy didn't get the chance to answer. We were going into a music break right then. Do you remember what that was? And if not, we can.
I do.
Okay. Can you start it with what the end of what that question was, or in regards to this, and then answer that just so the listeners are with us?
The question, and you can tell me, Mariah, is basically if there's, for example, a white man in a room and he's being racist or doing something disrespectful to someone, and in that moment they're not speaking for themselves, or like whatever's happening in that moment, this person's energy is just overtaking the space. Do I feel called as a white man to use my voice to help change the situation?
Yeah, and to pass the mic, not that you're the one that's saving it, not that you're the savior, but that you're passing the mic.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it, and it's so contextual. You know, I feel like it's like whenever I'm in a space, I'm a big white dude, and I also feel like I have a lot of fire in me, and so there's a lot behind, like around my own safety, where I feel like I can use my voice in ways and not feel threatened, and so I feel really comfortable doing that. But you know, one of the things that came up is like one of the responses I've had before is there might be a situation where to me, I'm always wondering, what's gonna actually further a conversation or get people to connect? And there might be a situation when I might, rather than call out the white dude for doing something or being defensive, it could be like relating to, hey, like I know what it's like to feel shame for this or that, and you know, diffusing the emotional charge behind perhaps the shame that's really driving the anger, like whatever the behavior is. But it's so contextual, but I do feel I love using my voice in that way.
Cool.
All right. Well, here's what we'll do. We did have a guest that came in during the music break, and so I want to bring him loop him into the conversation. His name is Jesse O. And Jesse O. One of the reasons, so I haven't met all of the guests today, in a sense of like, you know, I haven't grown up with them, and all I have is assumption or presumption as to how they grew up. I don't know. I find myself wanting to ask all three, even though Jesse hasn't even gotten to speak yet. And who's this with you?
Oh, this is my girlfriend, Taylor.
And welcome, Taylor. How you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
All right. And so I find myself wanting to ask, who's grown up, or of you three, who's grown up with, or have any of you grown up with African American or persons? Like, did you, I don't mean like, yeah, you knew some, but have you grown up with them in terms of like any of your other friends that you've known for years and you know in a special way because of that? And I'm specifically thinking about, elementary and middle school and junior high and high school rather. Had you grown up with any people of color and specifically African Americans? Not meaning that you saw them around, but did you actually, let's say, what about you, Paul?
So I grew up in Novato in Marin County on the Sonoma border, and I grew up with very few African-American peers. There was one girl in my class in elementary school. There was a few kids in middle school. There were a few kids in high school. I played football with a few of them. I had one classmate who I can recall had a big old fro.
I can see that. Actually.
I used to throw pens into it for fun.
Gotcha.
And yeah, real talk. And if my recollection is that most of the special ed class was black kids. And I reflected on that a decade later as an educator and realized how messed up that was and how. Yeah, we can go into that.
We certainly can't. We won't.
Go into that deep.
Another show and how it affects us in the school system.
That's my experience.
But thank you. How about you, Jeremy?
Two come to mind. One was my older brother's best friend, and him and my brother used to whip my ass every day.
Okay. Oh, that's it. That's the end of the story. That's all I was going to say. That's the end of the story. Really quick before I ask Jesse, just keep in mind, if you want to call in, the number here is 502-509-5229. Once again, we want to thank Golden Safari for all their assistance and feeding us and different things. So... Jesse, I feel like I don't need to ask you this question, but it's the question to everybody. What's been your experience growing up in the Bay Area?
I'm going to be honest, ever since I was a kid, most of my best friends were always African American. As long as I can remember, the closest friends that I would hang out with outside of my other friends, they were always black. I grew up in foster care from 13 until I was 18, and my family was actually black. They took really well care of me, and I went to church. I did all the normal things that regular people do, and I didn't feel like I was different from them in any way, shape, or form. They made me feel like I was family. I went to mostly black schools, and I bounced around most of the Bay Area and that sort of thing. And honestly, the other side and seeing that is my side. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, how do I put it? I don't know, like I've had both sides happen to me. I've had the white privilege and I've had the non-white privilege. I've had cops get out and pull guns on me, and I've had people follow me through the store just because of the way I was dressed, etc. But I definitely do see the need to speak on those things.
Mm-hmm. You know what I find interesting? This being the first time that I've saw you in this kind of setting where you had to do this kind of speaking. And so what I'm finding, what's funny to me is, like, I know your slang voice. I know your Jesse get down, what's happening, where if people heard you on the radio, they probably would assume that you were African American by your vernacular, right? And so it's very interesting to me that you're doing what many of us find ourselves having to do when we're talking to certain people, is we have to learn how to code switch and talk this certain way. So it's very interesting seeing you do it as European American or white American. And then it makes sense to me, of course, that you grew up around majority, or sound like all African Americans and or people of color. So it's just an interesting observation that I'm finding that I think is actually really cool. And so when I hear you say that you've gotten to see both sides, what I wonder, I was going to stop you there, but I wanted to make sure you got your entire thought out. What I wonder is, part of me feels like, we have that thing that we say, it's a black thing, you wouldn't understand. And part of that's like, you know, people get upset when they hear that, like, well, how what do you mean? Like, I can be empathetic. I can understand what I know what it feels like to be heard, or I know what it feels like. So particularly with you, when you say, I know what it feels like to have both, to be both. And so to exercise the privilege part of it, but also, you know, how it feels to walk around a store and be followed. And that's a great example of some of the things that happens to African Americans. And then there's part of me that just feels like, well, even in saying that, I feel like anything that you would come up with that felt like it was the part of you that doesn't feel like you were privileged for being white when it happened, I feel like in any case that you mentioned, without knowing all of them, and some listeners might get a little whisked off, but I feel like anything that you've been through that was hurtful that kind of way, that seemed like you were being targeted, still would be worse if the same thing happened to somebody who was African American in any of the cases. As a matter of fact, living in somewhere, anybody who lives in the Bay Area or somewhere that's just as diverse as it, well, certainly there's stores you can go in and they're watching anyone in there. But let's say if we all went in there together, which of us would they watch? Did they just watch you because you were dressed like what they think an African American dressed like? You dress, when I've seen you dress very hip hop, which is cool with me. But I'm wondering if, you know, but then it's like, okay, well, how much of that has to do with, I don't know. I just see a difference there still. I still don't, I don't know if I believe that you would still feel the same way. And yet you didn't say this, but I don't feel like there would be the same feeling towards you in the same situation, even though you grew up and you've seen with your own eyes this treatment you will have had to have, right? Are there any situations for you that you can think of where you actually were privy to see situations that directly were because you were white and they were not? Are there things like where you've seen your black friends and because that's all you've grown up with, and your family and all that are all black? So have you seen this happen with your eyes where it was a difference?
I've seen plenty of situations where I've gotten away with things in one case, but not, you know, while they were with me. But I've been in cases where, you know, I've been with them and, you know, they've had, like, I've seen them get pulled out of the car when I just would have gotten let go with a fix-it ticket or something of that nature.
Right.
But, yeah, I can definitely tap in with the fact that you said that there is no situation where I could feel that type of pain or that type of discrimination, because you're right, I couldn't. But not even a but, just the fact that I'm a little nervous. I'm going to be honest with you.
It's okay.
You're all
but
good.
Thank you, and
You're all good, bro.
And thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not a big paragraph. I'm long-winded, so I'll
Yes, you are.
person's ear off.
As we all know and love.
Oh, are all you
Speak
guys
for yourself.
And anybody who's listening to this that knows me, they're playing, yeah, he admitted it in front of everybody. I never said I would.
I have no problem doing that in any shape or form. I'm trying to get my thoughts collected, and I'm trying to get them out in the proper way without offending anybody, and not that, you know, that's a worry of mine, because it's really not. But at the same time, I have a tendency to speak things that I don't always think clearly, or I don't see the other end of where they come out of my mouth.
Gotcha.
So I'm just trying to work that in my head before I allow myself to speak.
Jesse doing a hell of a job.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt.
Did you?
Yeah, I got. It's Paul. Yeah, I got a quick response to that. Yeah, you know, one is that you know, I've often heard that you know, we come from a culture, Western culture really values perfectionism. So like I even found myself earlier when I talked over you, Mariah, for a second.
Right, yes.
Yeah, cool, Mariah. And I don't know if I talked over or I like interjected, but I was like, oh my God, did I just like talk over like the female-bodied individual in the room? And then I was like, wait, no, stop breaking down so much or being so tiptoey, right? And then also, like, I hear you talking about not like your intent, not knowing where the impact will go. And I think something that's really important that I've heard is like act in good faith, but act, and if if the impact is wrong, like just be ready to be corrected. And so like I find myself super nervous too. Am I going to say something wrong? Am I going to like piss people off? Am I going to like have one of my unconscious biases come through? And I think it's like a constant work, and you did a really good job of that, but like to just be willing to make those mistakes, because we're going to make them as white people, and as men.
As people.
Right. Yeah,
as humans, period.
Yeah.
Humans,
right.
period.
That's all I got, yeah.
That's
not all I got, but that's what I got right now.
I got a question for you, Paul, as well as Jeremy. This is not new, like the experience for Black people, especially in America, but experience for Black people. Do you think your heightened sense of activity is due to YouTube and Facebook and social media? Do you think you would still be who you are 50, 60, 100 years ago, being that it was not as highlighted? 92, Rodney King got beat, and everybody was like, oh my God, this is happening. And we're like, yeah, it's been happening for decades and centuries, 400 years, at least in this country, speaking of, due to Europeanism, colonizing. But do you think you would have the same passion or the same belief that this is happening without YouTube, without Facebook, without Mike Brown and Oscar Grant and Rodney King happening in such a short period of time? If it was like one thing happened 5 years ago, then you're like, oh, publicly, one thing happened 5 years ago. You're like, oh, well, see, that was an exception, not the rule. For us, it's a rule. Like, this happens every day. Like, we get on Twitter and it's like, damn, again. So there's like a sense of like, oh, wow, I'm finally starting to see it. Not feel it, but starting to see it. Do you think that's due to social media primarily? Or do you think your passion would have still been there?
For me, I think it's social media, but really when I connect to what really fuels me, it's relationships. And put a lot of time into relationship, and that's what really drives me.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about just all the stories I've heard from elder activists and their work in the 60s and 70s, and know that there was like a movement for justice in whatever form. But I also know that most of my exposure was the Walter Scott video, was the Eric Gardner video and recording, and so it's hard for me to separate that because it's existed before, and even like Quakers in the during the abolitionist movement,
John Brown,
right, and at the same time, most of my exposure, which lead to my relationships, as I think Jeremy's right, like exposure, like even having a conversation with you right now is, opening me up to new ways of interacting and getting out of the bubble that I was born in, but I do think that for me, just seeing the videos was was a way to take the numbers and turn it into an experience. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Great questions and great answers. We'll go right into this, and we'll be back with more on more situation and circumstance. White privilege here at Race Obligations, KCBZradio.com.
Log on to kcbzradio.com and check the schedule for Situation and Circumstance Live, complete with music, live phone call access, and additional audio and programming. Anthony and TBT would love for you to be a part of the live broadcast and recording of Situation and Circumstance at kcbzradio.com.
Once again, we're back here at kcbzradio.com, Situation and Circumstance. I got to give a shout out to DJ Khaled, Holy Mountain featuring Buju Banton, Sizzla, Movado, 070 Shake. That's one of my favorite songs right now. That's off of that new album that just came out. That's you got to hear that when you're ready to meditate. They're talking about a lot in that song there. So yeah, we're back here talking about we're talking about white privilege, rather. Yeah. And we're with Jesse, Paul, and what's that guy's name? Jeremy? I'm kidding. That's a friend of mine. And so during the music break there, Jesse was saying some things that I wondered. I don't know if he remembers everything he was saying, but I love what you were saying about sometimes when people say they don't see color, I get the whole way that can be annoying to some, because it's like, okay, well, many years ago that used to be okay to say I don't see color. And then for us, it felt like, for us meaning African Americans, Pan-African, it felt like well, we don't want you to not see color. We just want, when you see ours, for you not to respond a certain way or act a certain way or this kind of thing because of it. We want it to be as celebrated as any other color that we celebrate. And so, having said that, what was it you were saying a little bit about how you were raised and some things? Can you share that? And just get up a little bit closer to the mic for us.
Yeah, well, Julius had asked basically about if 100 years ago, because of social media and everything being posted online and that sort of thing, would I still be able to say that I see those things or be so knowledgeable about them or say that they're happening? The way I was raised, and that's back on what you were saying, is like I was raised to just not see anybody as different from me. Like I said, we all bleed the same, we all eat the same, we all sleep the same. You know what I mean? In different, variations. With that being said, 50 years ago to 100 years ago, when you have so many of one people, a collective of people coming together and saying, hey, we are being mistreated, and we have more than enough proof saying that, yes, we have mistreated you, specifically we as white people, and there's no argument there.
Right.
Maybe, you guys need to be listened to. That voice does need to be heard. And I don't know why it took so long.
I got you. Yeah. That's what's up, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first step. It's like alcoholism. The first step is admitting, or acknowledging something that's one has done. And I think a lot of people who I've encountered, a lot of white folks, they personally feel guilty. And I'm like, or they avoid, well, I didn't do it. Or I got 2 black friends. Or, I would have voted for Obama 4 times if it was. And it's like, no, I'm not. You might not be the direct issue, but you not trying to fix it, I believe, is the direct issue. Or if you not putting in work to at least know, like you said, like, you got to do some research. You got to go in the books just like everybody else. I mean, you in school for a certain amount of time to get a grade. This is real life. Like I'll be a fool if I didn't read every day about how to deconstruct this system. I would be a fool if I didn't do that. So why must we stop reading? Why must we stop learning after 12th grade or after college? And so I appreciate that sentiment, because it's a necessity.
And it goes back to what I was asking you earlier, Jeremy, about duty. And so that's what that goes back to, is like the duty of you saying you must learn about it or do something about it, because how are we going to change anything if you're not a part of that? You're like you said, you might not be the issue, but if you're not trying to do something about it, if you're not trying to do something with that privilege that you just naturally are born with, then what are you doing?
And see,
that is the question.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
But see, like, to that point, like, I'm not asking anybody for anything besides learning. And then you could do with that, you can apply that if you do. But like, I'm not surprised by humans being humans. Like, there's a privilege that white people have that I'm like, damn, why would I give that up? Like, why would I? So you have to apply the knowledge you do have. But again, I'm not gonna ask any white person to do anything besides educate themselves.
Which is, if they're doing that, then that other part's gonna automatically.
Exactly.
It should.
Yes.
But again, that's not for me to be like, hey, you better do this. All I'm gonna ask for white people is to educate themselves, and however they do that, and whomever they teach, we gotta. It's wealth. Knowledge is wealth, so you gotta reinvest it. Is how I see it. So that's what I'm doing to the black folks. Is I'm getting some knowledge, and then I'm reinvesting it.
You know what I love that you said earlier is like, you were like, well,
you didn't live all of it?
Why would you give? Well, some of what? Oh, he's talking crazy. Mother shucker. See there?
These lovebirds.
What I love is that when you said about like, if I was white and these certain things were happening, why would I want to give that up? And I remember something to that effect, right? And I remember Will Smith in that movie Wild West.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then he was on there, right? And then there was this part of the movie where it's way back in the day. So there was a white woman there, and she had these huge breasts, and he was beating on them. That kind of has something to do with this, kind of not.
Is it?
But he had got caught doing some things, and they were trying to hang him. And so he just went into his comedy bit, right? He was like, well, hell, I get it. He was like, slavery. Who wouldn't want somebody to do everything for him? You're right? Who wouldn't want that? I get it. I know why you're doing it. And he got a lot of what they call guff. He got a lot of bad press for just that line in a movie that he didn't even write. But because he said, why wouldn't somebody want that? And the reality of that is there's a set of people who set things up who had evil on their mind. And then there's people who were pulled into that evil and were raised in that evil way. And so sometimes I wonder, well, how much time, how easy is it for someone who is raised in that with that evil notion to just get past that? We're in the Bay Area. It's diverse, it's inclusion, it's fought for women's rights, it's fought for gay rights, it's fought for black rights, it's Black Panthers, it's all of this stuff. So everybody out here, and I tell people, if you're from a different state, and I have family members in Virginia, shout out to y'all in Newport and all out there, and in Indiana, shout out to y'all in Fort Wayne, but all these other places where for them it's like very black and white, and it's very like, this is how our brand of white people is, and this is what it is. So some people can't even fathom that there's a place that exists like here. Not saying we don't have work to do here in California. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, like, if we have work to do here, and we have people like on this show right now that are part of organizations that help bring awareness to other white people of what's going on. There are white people here who sing movies like When They See Us and broke down, and that movie changed their life, and now they want to do all kind of things for the culture. We assume and have a blindfold on, I think, in some of these places that exist that are that diverse, that's just how it is everywhere, and it's just absolutely not. It's just not. I wish it was. And so I wonder how much of us should be. Does that mean we should be grateful that the amount are doing it, or should we? And as a matter of fact, let me pose that to our guests. Do you believe that black people should be grateful that there exists white people who are not doing it in the white saviorism way of oh, let me give a black person a job, I did my part, but in that sense of the amount of work that you're doing to make sure that you're aware and bring awareness to this? Do you think that black people should appreciate that, or what is your stance on how should black people feel that there are white people working towards stopping this? How should we feel when these things are happening this many years later?
I'm gonna go ahead and speak on that. I personally do not feel like we should be gratified or appreciated in any way, because that helping the next man or wanting to speak up for the next man should be more normal. Like, you got a bunch of people who look to be gratified for things that are normal these days. Why should you be gratified for something you're supposed to be doing each and every day? You wake up, I'm sorry, you don't have to teach everybody right from wrong when they're born. It's a natural thing in most people. So for somebody to sit there and sit back and not speak and not do their part, that would whisk me off.
I dig it.
I'm snapping to that.
Thank you for saying whisk.
Yes.
I had to think about it first.
And thank you for what you said.
Yes.
Paul?
Yeah, I got an idea. And I think gratitude's interesting. Gratitude's like, if someone's thankful and they tell me, or if someone's like grateful, then it might reinforce that behavior. But going into it expecting that is tricky. So I don't know if that's should be grateful. But I do want to touch on something you said previously about like raised in evil. And I think that a lot of the real work to be done is not the obvious racist, but as a lot of like leaders have mentioned, like the white moderate. Like I grew up in the suburbs and I wasn't even around many black people, as I said, and so I'm very removed from the injustices that perpetuated the lifestyle that I grew up in. And I think it's that removal that is so toxic. You know, like Jesse, I hear you saying you like grew up and you saw it every day, right? Like I didn't grow up and see it every day, but I probably perpetuated it through my life more than you did, you know? But I didn't know it. And so I think it's breaking down that unconsciousness and connecting those dots. That is what really allows that. And then when that happens, white people can have guilt. Because then you'd be like, oh, I did that, like by buying my shoes, I like supported child labor, like you know, by doing this, I supported this. By doing that, I supported that. Oh my God, I'm reflecting on the way I treated women growing up, and like, gee, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's like that guilt factor, but then there's the okay, like now you know it, learn.
Do something.
Now what? And then the thing that I liked, what you said was like being like, yo, guys, like learn, you know. And I think for me, like one of the best ways to show up is, especially as like a white man or white passing man or what have you, is acknowledge that I'm like trained by the media. You know, all the movies I saw, white men were in power. Black people were more often than not like thugs, and especially like the 90s and the 80s, like how those patterns have made me feel and act in superior ways. And the biggest thing I feel like to do is like passing off the mic, but to listen and follow leaders of color and people of color. You know, like you say, hey, Paul, want me to come on this radio? I'm like, oh, hey, that's so cool. I'm so, no, great. Like a leader in the community, here I am, you know? Or like, hey, like show up to this action. I don't know if that's quite right, but you're saying it's right. And I'm going to trust that you want me here, you know, and to kind of just like start really listening to and following actions of leaders of color when asked, because to say no is to say that I know better than you, you know? And so that's, yeah.
No, thank you for that. You led us perfectly. That's a nice segue into what is something that you would like to say to other European Americans and or white people. What is something that you would like to say to them in terms of what can they do? People who are listening and they want to know, well, okay, I did go through those stages and I felt the guilt and I felt and I didn't know about this or that, but what would you say to them? What can a white person do? In 45 seconds or less. This is Jeremy. And thank you, Paul, for that. Jesse as well. We'll go to you next.
There are so many things. One is don't get so defensive, and when you see that coming up, just let that discomfort be there. And but really the main one that comes up for me is recognize how comfortable your life is and wonder what makes you feel uncomfortable and move a little bit towards that.
I like that. Like it's almost like try something new on. You've been wearing the same shirt all this time. Try a different shirt on.
Yeah, try something new on. Explore different contexts and stretch that muscle of discomfort. Because I feel like partly what this conversation and what like the evolution of our nation is going to take in the world is more people being uncomfortable who have been comfortable their whole life.
Nice. Thank you, Jeremy. And how about you, Jesse? Jesse, J-Dog. Look.
Can you do me a favor and repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what would you say, what would you want to say that you think would be helpful? What would you want to say to other white people? If white people are listening and they're wanting to know, well, hey, maybe they grew up like you, where it's like, I grew up around nothing but black people. Everybody knows I'm not racist or anything like that. Well, what can a white person who, even if they grew up around, culturally, they grew up around or within the, the neighborhoods of black people, what would you say that still would be something that white people could do to help, I don't know, level the playing field or become more aware or just help us get to this beautiful mecca of I don't know, multicultural tapestry, whatever it is that each individual is looking
for? That's nice, I like that.
In my mind, for somebody to want to reach out and do something in the first hand or want to educate themselves, they have to have the want to or interest to learn about those things. A lot of people just push something to the side because it's easier, or they won't do anything because they're afraid to stand up, or because, they're afraid of being singled out or being that guy or that woman. it took a long time for me to even acknowledge a lot of things. I mean, I was always aware of things, but because of my own young ignorance in my own mind, because I hadn't fully grown and been aware of things and just being aware of the person next to me, I was still really selfish in my own mind, but I really had to realize that, you know, there are things that I can do and there's things that I can say. And, you know, if I am out and I do see something of racism or, you know, white privilege, do speak up. Because if you don't, that doesn't mean the next person will. And just because you have a black man or woman speaking up for themselves doesn't always mean there's somebody willing to listen.
Good job. Good job. I want to thank our guests for doing a remarkable job at assisting us in dissecting what white privilege is, what it means, how it affects us, and how we can also be part of a healthy solution. That's what we do here on Situation and Circumstance. We try to give you an opportunity, give all of us an opportunity to just talk about some things. We do believe that, as always, our promise to our listeners is that we will continue to make beautiful mistakes. We embrace the opportunity afforded by our ancestors to speak, whether right or wrong, weak or strong. We be learning humans working on liberation and scaffolding a meaningful and fair existence for all. Till next time, my netches. Au revoir.
Thank y'all for listening.
Thank y'all.
Situation and circumstance. Fight for wisdom, not ignorance. Trying to avoid it is not a lonely dance. Can we see each other with only a glance? Situations and circumstances. Fight for wisdom, not ignorance. Trying to avoid it is not a lonely dance. How can we see each other with only a glance?
Cake mix and race mixes, matrix, kill the witches, 3 digits, made of 6s, KKK or white privilege, old spirits, blood riches, real hatred, fake forgiveness, skinny image, fat problems, I don't really know how we solve them, gods made us, kings gave us, 2 enslavers, 2 enslavers, castaways on railways, underground dark web pages, Marvel heroes, connect the zeros, connect the pharaohs, bone marrow, Egyptian princes, dark and ancient, preserve the patience, black and Haitian, white and Asian, British coaches, eat crustaceans, ocean roaches, Illuminati inject the bodies, GMOs, drug hobbies, Aboriginal, Pan-African, old biblical, reincarnation, hip-hop playlists, vocal rangers, sexist wages, sex changes, the game of life, bullets fly, ruin nights, players clueless, kids' rights, humans fight, nature loses, hard of hearing, dolomite, Darwinism, Garvanite, hates a virus, terabytes, hard to live with parasites, come on!
Situation and circumstance. Fight for wisdom, not ignorance. Trying to avoid it is not a lonely dance. Can we see each other with only a glance? Situations and circumstances. Fight for wisdom, not ignorance. Trying to avoid it is not a lonely dance. How can we see each other with only a glance?
Look, some of us robotic, programmed to follow. Some of us have logic and we wide awoke. Some of us don't got it till we learning slow. Some of us love God as part of